I never thought I'd witness someone try to steal a house right in front of me. But there she was, my Aunt Denise, standing in my late grandfather's living room, arms crossed, chin lifted like she was about to declare herself queen. "I'm taking over," she announced, her voice dripping with self-importance. "Grandpa wanted me to have this place." I nearly choked on my coffee. The funeral had just ended a few hours ago. The whole family was still emotionally wrecked, exhausted from saying our final goodbyes. But Denise? She was thriving. Smug. Confident. Practically giddy. She wasn't mourning. She was plotting. I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head. "Denise, what the hell are you talking about?" And that's when she pulled out the will. A crisp, cream-colored document, perfectly folded, held between her freshly manicured fingers. "This," she said dramatically, like she was revealing the 10 Commandments, "is Grandpa's final wishes." I stared at her. Then at the paper. Then back at her. There was no way in hell this was real. See, my grandfather wasn't just some careless old man. He was meticulous. The kind of guy who kept everything. He didn't make sloppy mistakes. And yet there was Denise waving that paper around like a golden ticket. I wasn't the only one who smelled bullshit. My dad, who had been sitting quietly in Grandpa's recliner, still lost in thought, slowly looked up. My uncle, standing near the fireplace, frowned. Even my mother, who usually tried to keep the peace, narrowed her eyes. No one spoke. No one moved. Denise cleared her throat, flipping to the last page. "It says right here that Grandpa left the house to me," she continued, her tone trying to sound innocent but failing miserably. "I know it's a surprise, but you all have to respect his wishes." I snatched the paper out of her hands. The moment my eyes landed on the signature, I knew. Sloppy too. The handwriting was off. The ink was too fresh. And worst of all, the signature. Grandpa always signed his name the same way. Sharp, clean strokes. Every letter distinct. This looked like someone had tried to copy it from memory and gave up halfway through. I looked up at Denise, holding the paper between my fingers. "You expect us to believe this is real?" I asked, shaking it in front of her. Her jaw tightened. "Of course it's real. I got it directly from Grandpa's lawyer." "Really?" I shot back, raising a brow. "Because Grandpa's actual lawyer is supposed to be here in 20 minutes. Guess we'll see what he has to say." That wiped the smug look right off her face. She froze, her fingers twitching at her sides, her mind clearly scrambling for a way to recover. I could see the panic creeping in, the realization that her perfect little scheme was falling apart way too fast. For the first time since she walked in, Denise looked worried. And she should have been. Because this was just the beginning. The moment I snatched the so-called will from Denise's hand, I already knew something was off. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room locked onto me as I scanned the document. My dad leaned forward in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. My uncle crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. Even my mom, who usually tried to play the peacemaker, was staring at Denise like she had grown a second head. And Denise? She just stood there, chin lifted, arms crossed, radiating fake confidence. "Denise," I said, flipping to the last page, "where exactly did you get this?" She smiled, all teeth and arrogance. "From Grandpa's lawyer, of course. He gave it to me before Grandpa passed." I blinked. "Before he passed?" "Yes." I let out a sharp exhale, fighting back a laugh. Grandpa had been meticulous, the kind of man who double-checked everything, kept records like he was running a Fortune 500 company, and had never once made a legal decision without involving the family. The idea that he'd just hand Denise a will in secret? Yeah. "No, I'm sorry, Denise," I said, lifting the paper slightly, "but this doesn't feel right." Her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. "Of course it does. You're just shocked, that's all. I mean, I know you all expected to get the house, but Grandpa and I had a special bond." My dad exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Denise, Grandpa barely tolerated you." Her smile twitched. "That's not true." I ignored their back and forth and focused on the document. Something was gnawing at me. The formatting. The wording. The spacing between paragraphs. Something felt off. Then it hit me. The font, my uncle muttered before I could even say it. He had stepped closer, peering over my shoulder at the document. This isn't the same type Grandpa's Real will was printed in. Denise blinked. And in that fraction of a second, I saw it, the tiny, almost imperceptible panic flashing in her eyes. What? She asked a little too quickly. This isn't the format Grandpa's lawyer uses, my uncle continued, his frown deepening. Legal documents have strict standards. This looks wrong. I nodded, flipping to the last page. The fake signature was already a dead giveaway, but now I was noticing even more issues. The wording was clumsy. Grandpa's real documents were always precise, every sentence carefully structured. This read like someone had copied a legal template off the internet and filled in the blanks. Denise, I said slowly, lifting my gaze to hers. You didn't make this yourself, did you? Her eyes flashed with anger. Excuse me? Because if you did, I continued unfazed, that would be a felony. Her nostrils flared. I didn't? Well, guess what? I cut in. We'll find out real soon. Grandpa's real lawyer will be here in 20 minutes. Denise stiffened. And for the first time since she walked in, she looked genuinely nervous. A sharp knock echoed through the house. Denise flinched. I smirked. Right on time. My dad stood up and opened the door. Mr. Patterson stepped inside, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. He was an older man, probably in his 70s, but sharp as ever, with the kind of eyes that had seen every trick in the book. And judging by the way he immediately locked onto the document in my hands, he already knew something was up. That will, he said, adjusting his glasses. Where did you get that? Denise straightened her posture, putting on her best performance yet. Oh, Mr. Patterson. Thank goodness you're here. She forced out a breathless laugh, her voice thick with fake relief. I was just showing everyone what Grandpa left me. Silence. Mr. Patterson didn't move, didn't blink, didn't buy it. He turned his head slowly, meeting my dad's gaze, then mine, then my uncle's. Finally, he looked back at the document I was holding. He sighed. You all might want to see the real one. Denise stiffened. Excuse me? Ignoring her, Mr. Patterson walked across the room toward the massive steel safe in the corner. The thing had been there for decades, a hulking presence against the wall. Scratched, dented, locked up tight. No one, not even my dad, had ever been inside it. But Grandpa had always said, everything important is in there. The air was thick with tension as Mr. Patterson knelt down, entered the combination, and with a heavy clunk, the door swung open. Denise inhaled sharply. Inside, a stack of neatly organized folders, a few old photographs, and, most importantly, a thick sealed envelope sat waiting. Without hesitation, Mr. Patterson grabbed the envelope, broke the seal, and pulled out the real will. And the moment he unfolded it, his expression darkened. This, he said, holding up the document, is your grandfather's actual final will. I turned to look at Denise. She had gone completely pale. Denise's hands trembled slightly, her manicured fingers twitching at her sides. For the first time since she waltzed in here, she looked genuinely terrified. She should have been. Because the real will changed everything. The room was dead silent as Mr. Patterson scanned the document, his expression turning grimmer by the second. The weight of the moment hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Finally, in a steady, authoritative voice, he began to read aloud, Your grandfather left his house, his savings, and his land to be split evenly between his children, your father and your uncle. I felt a rush of satisfaction watching Denise's face drain of color. No mention of her name. Not a single word. Denise blinked rapidly, her breathing turning shallow. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her entire plan was crumbling right in front of her. My mom let out a slow exhale, one of pure relief. My uncle chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. But Denise? She just stood there, frozen like a glitching robot, as if she was trying to process how this was happening. Finally, she muttered, No. Mr. Patterson raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Denise shook her head harder, stepping forward like she could physically undo what had just been said. No, that's not right. He wanted me to have this house. He told me. Mr. Patterson didn't even bother responding. Instead, he flipped through the pages as if double-checking. There are no amendments, no verbal agreements noted. This was signed, notarized, and legally filed. This, he lifted the document slightly, is your grandfather's final official statement regarding his estate. Silence. Then, from across the room, my dad exhaled sharply. Well, there it is. Denise's eyes darted around the room, searching for some kind of escape route. Some way to talk her way out of this. Then, in a split second, she snapped. You're lying, she shrieked, lunging forward. She made a wild grab for the will, her nails flashing as she reached for the document in Mr. Patterson's hands. I stepped between them, blocking her just in time. Oh, like the will you magically pulled out of thin air? I shot back. Her eyes locked onto mine, burning, wild, desperate. Grandpa wanted me to have this house, she screamed. I folded my arms. Did he write that down? My voice was calm, level. Or are we just supposed to take your word for it? She let out a high-pitched laugh, the kind that sounded more like a nervous breakdown than anything close to amusement. But it wasn't a joke. Not for her. Because we had just scratched the surface of what she had done. And she was about to realize just how deep her grave had already been dug. Denise wasn't just a liar. She was a planner. And she wasn't done fighting yet. Denise was shaking her head, mumbling under her breath, like somehow denying reality would change it. But then, something shifted. Her breathing slowed. Her posture straightened. The fear in her eyes? Gone. And in its place? Arrogance. A calculated smirk spread across her lips as she lifted her chin. Fine, she said smoothly. Maybe I wasn't technically in the will. But let's be honest, we all know Grandpa wanted me to have this house. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, really? Denise nodded, feigning patience like she was explaining something to a group of idiots. Of course. He and I had a special bond. He told me many times that he wanted me to live here. My dad scoffed. Denise, Grandpa barely tolerated you. Her smirk twitched. That's not true. My uncle chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, so that's your new story? Grandpa just forgot to update his legally binding will, and we're supposed to believe he wanted you to have this place, out of the kindness of his heart. Denise nodded way too eagerly. Yes. I crossed my arms. Then why, I asked slowly, did you list the house for sale before he even died? Silence. Denise's entire body went stiff. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes widening for just a fraction of a second before she caught herself. What? She said, her voice suddenly too high-pitched. My uncle smirked, pulling his phone from his pocket. He tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward us. And there it was. Grandpa's house. Listed for sale. With a timestamp showing that Denise had put it up 3 weeks before Grandpa passed away. Oh, and it gets better, my uncle added. She also reached out to multiple buyers, saying she'd be moving in soon and was looking for a quick cash sale. Denise's face turned bright red. I didn't, she stammered. Don't even try, I cut in. We have the emails. The listing. And I'm sure if we call the real estate agent, they'd love to confirm how you were shopping this house around before Grandpa was even in the ground. Denise opened her mouth, probably about to spit out another excuse, but she saw the way we were all looking at her now. Like a predator caught in a trap. There was nothing left for her to spin. Nothing left for her to manipulate. And for the first time since she walked in, Denise had no idea what to say. Denise's entire body stiffened, her brain scrambling to come up with some kind of excuse, some way to twist the situation back in her favor. But there was nothing left to twist. The proof was right there. A house listing, complete with her real estate agent's contact info, and a timestamp from weeks before Grandpa even passed away. She had been so sure she'd get away with this. So sure she could forge a will, waltz in, and take over like a queen claiming her throne. But now, her entire plan was burning to the ground. And she knew it. Mr. Patterson let out a heavy sigh. Well, he said, slipping Grandpa's real will back into his briefcase, this is going to be a problem for you. Denise's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? The old lawyer adjusted his glasses. Forgery is a felony, he said simply. Attempting to commit real estate fraud? Also a felony. Denise laughed, a short, desperate sound. This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything. Oh, but we can, Mr. Patterson replied, unfazed. And legally? I have to report this. Then, without another word, he pulled out his phone. Denise's face drained of color. Wait, she blurted, her voice suddenly desperate. I didn't, but she didn't finish the sentence. Because panic finally set in. She whipped around, eyes darting to the front door like a trapped animal. And then, like the true coward she was, she ran. Straight for the door. But my uncle, who had been casually leaning against the wall, moved faster than I'd ever seen him move before. In one smooth motion, he stepped in front of her, blocking her path. You're not going anywhere, he said, his voice cool and steady. Denise spun around, looking for another exit, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then, just as she lunged toward the back door, sirens? Through the window, red and blue lights flashed against the darkening sky. Denise froze mid-step. The sound of car doors slamming sent a visible shudder through her body. No, 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 she whispered under her breath, shaking her head, still trying to convince herself that this wasn't happening. Then came the knock at the door. My dad didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pulled the door open, and in walked two uniformed officers. Ma'am, one of them said, looking straight at Denise. We need you to come with us. Denise lost it. She spun around to face my dad, her hands clawing at the air, her voice shrill with desperation. Tell them it's a mistake, she shrieked. Tell them I'm supposed to have the house. This is all a misunderstanding. My dad? He didn't even flinch. He just folded his arms and said, You did this to yourself. The cops stepped forward. Denise fought them. She kicked, screamed, threw herself toward the floor like a toddler mid-tantrum. This isn't fair. You're all setting me up. This is my house. The officers barely reacted. One grabbed her wrist, the other cuffed her hands behind her back, and just like that, Denise was being escorted out the front door in handcuffs. It should have been the end. But Denise? She wasn't done yet. For a few glorious months, life was peaceful again. Grandpa's house was finally at peace, and with Denise out of the picture, we thought we'd seen the last of her. We were so wrong. One afternoon, while my dad was sorting through leftover estate paperwork, he opened a letter, then immediately went dead silent. His fingers tightened around the paper, his jaw clenched so hard I thought he might break a tooth. What the hell is this? He muttered. Mom peered over his shoulder, skimmed a few lines, then gasped. I grabbed the paper from his hands and scanned it. My brain short-circuited. Denise was suing us for stealing her rightful inheritance. Her lawsuit claimed that we had conspired to alter Grandpa's will, tampered with legal documents, and manipulated him before his death. And the best part? She was suing for emotional distress and lost income, as if she had ever planned on working in the first place. I let out a sharp bark of laughter. Are you kidding me? She's actually trying to convince a court that her fake will was real, and Grandpa's legally filed document was the forgery? It was so ridiculous, I thought for sure no lawyer in their right mind would take her case. But somehow, she found one. And just like that, we were back in a legal nightmare. Mr. Patterson wasn't worried. He assured us that Denise had no legal standing, and the case would get thrown out immediately. But just to be safe, he started going through Grandpa's financial records, making sure everything was airtight. That's when he found something weird. A bank account that none of us had ever heard of. It was under Grandpa's name. But there was one secondary account holder. Denise. A sinking feeling settled in my gut as I flipped through the records. Over the last year of Grandpa's life, thousands of dollars had been withdrawn in small amounts, just enough to fly under the radar. But together, it added up to nearly $90,000. Denise had been stealing from Grandpa while he was still alive. And that's why she had been so desperate to get the house. She thought she could cover it up before we ever found out. But now, she wasn't just facing a lawsuit. She was facing prison time. Instead of waiting for her ridiculous lawsuit to get thrown out, we went on the offensive. We filed criminal charges against her for elder financial abuse and fraud. We also sued her for the $90,000 she stole, plus legal fees. Denise had no idea what hit her. One day she was daydreaming about winning in court, the next she was being served with court papers of her own. The moment she realized what was happening, she dropped her lawsuit. But it was too late. The police started investigating, and after reviewing Grandpa's bank records, they had all the proof they needed. Denise wasn't just facing a civil lawsuit anymore. She was facing prison time. And this time, she couldn't scream, cry, or fake her way out of it. Denise had spent her entire life manipulating, lying, and stealing. But this time she ran out of places to hide. The evidence was overwhelming. Between the forged will, the fraudulent house sale, and the $90,000 she stole from Grandpa, the prosecutors had more than enough to charge her. And when she realized she was actually facing prison time, she did what she always did. She tried to run. She drained what little money she had left, packed up her things, and tried to disappear. But law enforcement was already one step ahead of her. They caught her at the airport trying to board a flight to another state. She was arrested on the spot. And this time she wasn't getting off easy. Denise was charged with felony financial exploitation of an elder, wire fraud, and attempted real estate fraud. She ended up taking a plea deal, but this time she couldn't walk away with just probation. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison. And as for the $90,000 she stole, she had no money left to pay it back. So the court seized everything she owned, her car, her rented condo, her savings. Every last dollar went toward repaying what she had stolen. And the best part? The lawyer she hired for her failed lawsuit? She never paid him either. So after she got out of prison, he sued her too. Denise got exactly what she deserved. Twice over. To this day, our family doesn't talk to Denise. She got out of prison a couple of years ago, but she was never invited back into our lives. Last I heard, she was completely broke, living in a tiny apartment in another state trying to start over. And you know what? I don't feel bad. She thought she could steal a house, forge a will, and rob her own father. Instead, she lost everything. But the best part? She had to watch us win. While she was in prison, we used some of the money she was forced to pay back to renovate Grandpa's house. We kept it in the family just like he wanted. And then, one day about 6 months after Denise got out of prison, my cousin called me. "Dude," he said, barely holding in his laughter. "You're not gonna believe this. Apparently Denise, broke, desperate, and with nowhere else to go, had applied to rent a house in our town. And guess which house she unknowingly applied to? Grandpa's. She had no idea we still owned it. She was just looking for anything cheap, and it popped up on a rental site. When my uncle saw her name on the application, he nearly lost it. 'She wants to rent from us?' he said, laughing so hard he had to sit down. After everything, we saw an opportunity, and we took it." My uncle, who now handled the rental property, called Denise himself. But he didn't tell her who he was. He just pretended to be a normal landlord reviewing applications. "Hi, Denise," he said in his most professional voice. "We're considering your application, but we do have a few questions. Can you explain your rental history?" Denise, completely unaware, lied through her teeth. "Oh, I've always been a responsible tenant," she said. "I pay on time, I keep things clean. I'm just looking for a fresh start." My uncle played along. "That's good to hear. Now, this property has a lot of family history. How do you feel about respecting a home that's meant to honor someone's memory?" Denise hesitated for a second. "Oh, of course," she said quickly. "I'd be honored to live there." My uncle smirked. "Great," he said. "Because this house, it belonged to my father." "Your father?" Silence. Then, a weak, stunned, "Wait, what?" My uncle dropped the act. "Denise," he said, his voice flat. "You tried to steal this house. You forged a will. You stole from Dad. And now you actually think we'd let you live here?" She started stammering, trying to come up with some excuse, but my uncle didn't give her the chance. "This call is over," he said. "Find somewhere else." And then he hung up on her. Denise never found a stable home after that. She bounced around, living in crappy motels, couch surfing with whatever old friends she could find. But people caught on fast. She was a user, a liar, a thief, and she had burned every last bridge. She had left. Eventually she left town for good. We never heard from her again. Meanwhile, Grandpa's house is still in the family, still standing strong, still a reminder of the man who built a life for us. And Denise? She's nothing more than a bad memory. She thought she could steal her way into a better life. But in the end, she lost everything. And the best part? She had to watch us win.